All right, now we are broadcasting. Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Gonna talk to my friend Alex Bello today from Mixed Mental Arts. And of course, I mention this all the time on here, but for those who don't know, Mixed Mental Arts is an awesome podcast with Brian Callen, the awesome comedian and actor, and his brilliant and sometimes hilarious co-host, Hunter Motz. And they have idea sex about all sorts of ideas, and that's what I like to do on Mindgasms too, which is why I called it Mindgasms. So I guess I got to know Alex through the Mixed Mental Arts chats that we have when we talk about all sorts of exciting ideas on there too. And yeah, I just wanted to talk to you because it seems like we have sorts of similar interests, like I was talking about, like how we're interested in how culture applies to issues like religion and food and all sorts of other similar interests. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself there?
Yeah, hi. I'm Alex, and I'm a software developer in Washington, D.C. So I'm kind of just developing software day to day, but I do participate in MMA chats, which I've really enjoyed because, at least for me, I feel like I've grown a lot having those discussions and meeting people who I normally wouldn't have talked to. And it's actually brought a lot of issues to my attention that I don't think I would have heard of either.
I feel the
Um,
same way.
yeah, so it's pretty cool, and I'm really like glad to keep at least to be involved in that sort of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I feel the same way. Like it's so awesome to be, even though it's mostly virtual for me, especially, like be surrounded by a lot of like really like-minded people who are often even more obsessed with learning and self-improvement than I am. So it helps inspire me to
Yeah.
be more like that. And like I've literally started reading more since I got more involved with mixed mental arts too. Like
Oh, me
I
too.
already was reading a lot, but now I'm reading even more.
Yeah, I feel like I read a lot of fiction, and so like I've met all these people. I'm like, oh my god, I've never even like tried to read nonfiction in a very serious way. So I've been reading a lot more like actual like nonfiction books, and that's been eye opening.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like to always alternate between fiction and nonfiction. Like I'll read a nonfiction and then a fiction because I value as both of them to me are equally important for different reasons, but sometimes similar ones, right? Like obviously the I guess you read that blog that I wrote about reading books, right? Where I talked
Yeah.
about it in that about how I mean like obviously nonfiction books are really good for learning and fiction is just awesome because it's like you're immersing yourself in this fictional world and it feel like especially if you're someone who loves reading like me and obviously you too, you can just like get yourself totally immersed in this world using your imagination even more so than a movie often.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of the things I've learned from nonfiction, like good fiction authors especially, really work that into their own like their own writing in ways that kind of like drive it home quicker than like a nonfiction writer, I guess. So, I mean, it's kind of cool to see how that plays off of, it's like two different ways of hearing the same information, basically, but it just like
Yeah,
work better.
and sometimes you can learn more from fiction than nonfiction like you're talking
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It depends on the book. Like it depends on the writing quality of the author. Like it
Mhm.
depends on whether the nonfiction author is good at telling a story about something, or maybe it's a subject that doesn't really work in the form of a story, but it's like there are all these variables that are really obvious, right? Like writing quality and all those other ones that I mentioned, and so many more, basically.
Yeah, but I think they complement each other really well. So I
Oh
think
yeah, of course.
that's a
Yeah.
good idea to alternate. I haven't quite done that yet. But yeah, I think I'll probably start doing something like that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a prescription or anything like that. It's
Right.
just my preference. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like I'm so crazy sometimes that I just like, if I start not feeling like I'm not reading enough fiction, I feel like I'm getting too all like learny and intellectual, and I'm not using my
Yeah.
imagination
It's
enough. And then,
boring.
if I start reading not enough nonfiction, I feel like, man, I'm using my imagination so much, but I'm not learning enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely like a push-pull thing. But I think it's good to like keep aware of what you're doing. Because I think a lot of people don't even think like, oh, I've been binge watching too much TV lately. You know, like they just sort of keep doing what they're doing. So I think keeping aware of it is kind of a challenge, but a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, being disciplined is really important, I think, but so
Yeah.
is like play, as Hunter would talk about. I'm sure too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like both, it's not like in our culture, for example, we have like a really puritanical culture in terms of work ethic and stuff like that. And like I said, like it's important to make accomplishments and stuff like that. But one thing that I often have to remind myself of is to make sure that I enjoy life enough too, because sometimes I get really obsessed with like achievement at the cost. My mom's in the background and just agreed very loudly.
I think she's the breakout star of your podcast, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, actually Hayden asked me the other day if he could interview her on his podcast, so that would be awesome if that
That's
happens.
cool. Is she gonna
Yeah.
do it?
Yeah, I think she wants to. I'll just have to help her because she's not that good with technology.
Fair.
Yeah.
I'm not either, so
Well, it's like, you know how to do this, though. I mean, I know how to do this now too, but it honestly was really difficult for me at first just to figure out how to do a live stream.
yeah, honestly, like I think it's harder to pick up like new forms of social media than it is to like I code most of the day, so I know like how all these things are technically hooked up, but like I don't get all the etiquette and I don't understand like when you're supposed to post like a food picture or like a picture of you and your friends or like whatever. So I have two younger sisters, but the baby one especially is always giving me a hard time for like being a terrible social media user.
That's so funny. Like everyone's so obsessed with social media right now. Like
Well, she's
it
only
doesn't
6 years younger, and it's amazing to see how different it is, like from when I was her age, like how many more things she's, involved in online.
like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and like at least three other ones that I'm not remembering.
Yeah, there's like a bunch of I don't know. I don't understand.
I think I use mostly Facebook and Twitter, and I think LinkedIn. I never even did Instagram because I just figured like, I don't want to take pictures of stuff that much. Like, yeah, I have really delicious meals pretty often, but I don't want to be like, hey, look, here's my food. Hey, look, here's this awesome book I'm gonna read. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't sound that exciting.
I don't know. I like honestly am very, very bad at it. Which
Yeah.
is why mixed mental arts is awesome, because I feel like the Facebook group you can just like jump in and say whatever you want and you don't have to worry about like what's proper etiquette or what people are going to think about you.
Yeah, that's what's really nice about that. You can have like conversations and debates with people and not really have to worry that much about it getting really bad. Although I still get into a whole bunch of pointless debates, and I've been trying to work really hard lately on not getting into so many pointless debates because it's all just ego, really. It's just Like I want to prove that I'm smarter than the other person, which is really stupid.
Yeah, I'm working on that too. It's difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
Because like no one gets any points for winning a debate on Facebook or Twitter or
no.
anything like that.
And you're not even like winning friends. And most people I haven't actually met in person. So that doesn't affect anything. So
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm trying to like achieve, but there's a part of me that just wants to win so badly.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah.
I so often think that like people, the way they argue, I just think like, holy shit, are you fucking aware of how much naive realism you have right now? Like you're just like
Yep.
saying things like, this is the way it is. Yeah, but why do you think that's the way it is?
Yeah. And it's
What
hard.
about all these situations where it's not the way you think is the way it is?
I mean, it's hard to remember too that like, because I've only been in the group for maybe 6 months, 7 months. But like people are just joining and like everybody has to be on kind of their own path toward like, I don't know, like whatever we're working toward. So like you have to give other people like time to work there, but like sometimes the impulse to just kind of like shout at them is just so strong. But I don't know, I'm working on it, I guess.
Yeah, it's really like the there's the other part of that too is like if I don't waste so much time getting into pointless debates with people where it doesn't matter who wins and loses, it helps me have like more balance in my life and like do
Yeah.
other things like maybe go outside and read a book or something like that. I like to do that a lot now too.
Yeah. Well, and I noticed I've stopped paying attention to things like news about Trump or like the latest whatever is going on in the news. And I don't think I'm actually less informed than other people, but I'm just like a lot calmer and less angry at everyone. So I think like checking those kinds of impulses to not try to be right is actually really healthy.
Yeah, I think so too, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, like like once you start like practicing doing that too, you can almost like sense like your emotions starting to go. Not that like emotions are bad or anything, but it like helps you notice one emotion you're feeling, and you're starting to feel like, oh, you're starting to get defensive. Maybe
Yep.
you should stop now before you let this get out of
Yep.
control.
Or you can say like, why am I defensive about this? And like
Yeah.
sometimes I actually have a good answer for that. Which I mean, you've talked about your atheism and like your journey like to and from being an atheist, I guess, or whatever. I'm not sure what you would call yourself, agnostic, atheist. I don't know.
I think I would still call myself an atheist. The way I've said this before recently is I mean, some people would probably still label me as an agnostic, I would say, because some people have what I kind of view as a misconception about atheists, which is that atheists think that there absolutely undeniably is no God.
Mhm.
And I think it's more the case that being an atheist means that you don't believe that God exists. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're 100% sure about it. So that's basically what I think. I think that I believe that God does not exist because honestly, if you get right down to it, what has helped me learn this is partially from mixed mental arts, is that if I just get down to it, I just truly don't have this like feeling in my heart that God exists or any God exists or anything like that. I just don't feel like there are any gods that exist. But that just means that it means that I don't know. I just think that the probability is high that they don't. But how you feel is more important in beliefs like this than like how statistically likely it is to be possible, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, I mean, it is. I don't know. Like I didn't quite. I don't know if I quite got to like a militant atheist phase, but I definitely went through like a little bit of a this is kind of stupid kind of like phase. I think
Oh,
I
tell me about that. That's interesting because I didn't know
um
that.
yeah, I mean like so I came from a pretty religious like area, part of the country. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, but like the West Side, which is very Catholic. Um, And then I went to college in New York State at like a small liberal arts school. So everybody there was pretty much like Northeastern, like waspy. They didn't have a lot of religion. They didn't grow up in a church. And then there were a lot of Jewish kids also. So like being a Catholic, I was definitely a minority. And there was just so much sentiment that like the Catholic Church is bad or stupid or evil, or all three. That like it, you know, it kind of like seeps in, and you start thinking like maybe this is kind of goofy. Now I just like that's my family, that's my past, and like whatever, I don't care about it. You know, like it doesn't whether like people are religious or not doesn't really bother me. Um,
Okay, it sounds like we have like an almost identical mindset about it now, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, my family is still religious, so like I have no problem just going to church and like being part of the group and just kind of, you know, doing whatever they want to do. That really doesn't bother me. I have friends
Oh, okay.
who like their worst nightmare is being forced to go to church. They like, you know, throw a fit and make their mom really unhappy on Christmas, and like it to me it just doesn't seem worth it. And it's
Oh,
a
okay.
lot more calm to just go with it.
Oh,
So
okay. See, for me, like, I'd like the like the sound of going to church for me most of the time is just like, oh, it sounds so boring and annoying. And most of it, I don't go that much, but like any other time I go, it seems phenomenally boring and annoying because, you know, like I accept now I accept whatever people want to believe. And then I try to, as much as possible, just think that it, it doesn't matter if people want to believe things that are different from what I believe at all. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever as long as they don't try to hurt someone else. And but I still can't help thinking myself, just because my own opinion on it is just, oh my God, this is just fucking silly. But I still go to church sometimes because my mom still preaches occasionally and I go to support her. And I actually really like it when she preaches, to be honest. It's like the way I've described it before to someone else is that it's like seeing a it's like seeing a philosopher go up and speak in like the most hippiest way possible about Christianity, but she like doesn't use that much God language or something like that, which might be partially for my benefit, I think sometimes, but it's really interesting, I think.
yeah, I was gonna say, don't you have to if your mom is there?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I
but
mean, like before, when I was more of a militant atheist, like I was really militant at one point. I wouldn't even go to church to see my mom preach because I was just like, ah, this is fucking stupid. I don't want to fucking go to that stupid bullshit. No, that's like really childish shit when I look back on it.
that's how I feel, yeah. But I also personally really like the ritual aspect of it and the routine. And like I have other like rituals and routines. Like I have a very elaborate coffee
No,
routine.
I mean, like my reaction to it back then was just
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I mean.
I mean, okay, that's fair. Yeah, yeah. But like that, there's something about that aspect of church that kind of appeals to me, even if I don't really think it's, you know, like a real connection to like a real God or
Yeah,
something.
that's fine.
I
Like
don't know.
everyone likes ritual in some way, right?
Right. Yeah. Like humans have to have it. Like even little kids, like they all need to be on a schedule because that's what like comforts us and gives us stability. So I think removing religion entirely would probably have some negative effects in that respect.
that's how my mindset has changed about that more recently too. Like I guess in the last couple years or so, like I used to think that I used to agree more with like Sam's Bulldog when I've talked to him more recently. I identify with him because I used to have really similar opinions to him on religion, and it's great that we've found so much common ground lately. But I used to think, I don't know if he still thinks this now, but I used to think that, religion was basically undeniably bad. It's so much more worse than it is beneficial, to the point that it's just not useful. And if people do nice things, it's better for them to do nice things without religion anyway. So if they do nice things with because of religion, it doesn't matter, which is such an obvious rationalization when you think about it. And yeah, like that's how my mindset has changed. Especially with learning about like group selection and how religion might be evolutionarily selected for. I'm not necessarily 100% convinced that it is, but it seems like there's at least a distinct possibility that has been shown through scientific studies. So, and I think that, and I've been more become convinced that, people behave religiously or tribally or however you want to look at it, regardless of whether we have religion or not. So it's more important to pragmatically look at what people do with their beliefs than what it is that they believe, and why they believe what we do is more interesting to talk about, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, from my perspective, whether or not people have a religion, they will find something religious. Like I think, so Esther Perel talks about like what she calls transcendence, which is sort of the human feeling of being connected to something larger than yourself, and that we all need to feel that in some way.
This is the woman who's been on Tim Ferriss's podcast, who I talked with Kate Fogarty about, right?
Okay, yeah, Kate loves her. I haven't listened to Tim Ferriss in a while, so I don't know. But she's been doing like the rounds for a while because she had a few books come out, and she actually has a podcast that's really interesting too. But I think people find that feeling somewhere, and like if you just let them go to church, then it's like pretty accessible. But otherwise, you have to like make up something else, whether it's a community or like, in the case of like certain like alt-right groups or whatever, like they find something that can give them that feeling of being like connected to something.
That's even what Nietzsche basically said about it, right? He said something like, God is dead and we have killed him. Yeah. And he said that like, the way that Christianity has been viewed in society is gone, and that like he basically saw religion as bad, but he also thought that, well, that's debatable, I guess, but in a way he also said that if society loses religion, we replace it with something else. So that's what he was trying to do with this concept of the Ubermensch, or the Overman, or however you translate it to. I was talking with Isaiah Gooley about this recently, which is really interesting. Are you familiar with Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch?
Very briefly.
Okay.
I remember him coming up in a philosophy class, but not.
It's just his idea to like basically like form your own personal ideology and try to not be affected by all the tribes around you, which might be idealistic, but it's an interesting idea too. And I'm not saying I try to necessarily follow that idea, because there are some obvious flaws with it, but I think it's it's just interesting the way that Nietzsche looked at that and acknowledged that if you lose religion, society replaces it with something else.
Yeah, that's probably really true. I mean, I don't like my family and friends are all pretty tribal. So and they're pretty open about it. So like I don't I guess I didn't really understand when people started talking about how negative tribal or tribalness or whatever, or how bad it is for society. I didn't quite understand that. Like I saw it in the election, obviously, but I still don't. I think it's two sides to a coin. So you can't just say, oh, this one thing caused a problem, so let's get rid of it entirely, when there are positive aspects to it.
Yeah, that's an overly simplistic way to look at it, right? To just think that it's all bad. Like that's one thing that I've learned much more in recent years too, is that there are benefits to tribalism of any kind, regardless of what it is, and it's obviously not all bad. There are good aspects to it, like with mixed mental arts, for example. It's our own little tribe, but I mean, there are definitely benefits to it, and I mean, which and people are always talking about how we should be cautious to not get too tribal about our tribe, which is a good thing for a tribe to do, I think.
Yeah, you want to be conscious of it, I think. Because you don't want to tip into saying that other tribes are negative, or are bad, or coming to take all of our resources, so let's kill them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a tightrope, I guess, to walk. I don't know.
Yeah,
um,
definitely. That's what I always try to be, as conscious of that as possible. And like when people when people are getting mad about other tribes or representatives of other tribes, like this is why I defend Jordan Peterson so often, because even though he says some things that I disagree with, I like his approach to religion. And obviously a lot of people benefit from the type of tribe that he advocates for. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, or even the like really conservative tribe that people like Ben Shapiro claim to represent, or at least some people claim that he represents, and so on and so forth. You could say that about Trump even too, or anyone really.
yeah, for sure. And like when the shit hits the fan, like your tribe is the one who's going to take care of you. So you have to remember that there are periods of crisis too, and people need like an in group to turn to. But I don't know. I feel like this idea of like tribalness has become something that like people are saying only exists in, the last 2 years, but it's existed forever. So I'm not sure why
Yeah.
everyone's freaking about it suddenly.
Yeah, that's why I've said many times that I'm not Donald Trump's biggest fan, but it's so funny that people are so against Trump, and people think that politics, particularly American politics in general, is so much more tribal than it ever has been before. I mean, maybe it is, and maybe it's getting worse, but it seems like throughout history people are tribal.
Yeah, I don't know about politics. I mean, wasn't Andrew Johnson impeached just because everybody hated him in Congress? Like he didn't do anything wrong?
I'm not familiar with him.
I I thought he was impeached because of like a disagreement with Congress. I'm not positive, but
Oh,
like I
okay.
don't think he actually committed a crime or did anything that like technically would have made him, you know, worthy of impeachment. Um,
Oh, okay.
so like to me, that says that politics was always pretty fraught. um,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's always been a difficult idea to set forth in the first place, to just organize people so we can have functioning societies. And it's always this delicate balance between the government having too much power, but the government also needing to do things, because it seems like complete anarchy, or the anarcho-capitalists don't necessarily have it right, I would say.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've only been in DC for about 2 years. Actually, no, it's 3 years coming up in the summer. Um, I think I grew up with a fairly negative view of the government, just that they were kind of like bumbling idiots and can't do anything right, and are just like full of bureaucratic like mess kind of people. Um, but living here and like knowing people who are involved in politics and who are lobbyists and who are like working for Congress people, you start to see like it's not quite as messy as you think it is. Like everybody's just kind of doing their job, and like this like bureaucratic mess is like an emergent property, to quote, Spiros. Um, like individuals are just doing their job, and they're talking to the right people and they're trying to do the right thing. But things get like complicated when you have that many people doing the same thing in the same area, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me of the way Lawrence Lessig talks about it in Republic Lost. Or do you see that mixed mental arts episode with him recently?
Yeah, I saw one. I'm not sure if there was a more recent one. This one was from like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah,
that's the one I'm thinking of.
yeah. Then I listened to that one.
Okay.
I usually don't watch the podcasts. I usually just listen to them. So
I always prefer watching things if I can, but it doesn't matter. It
yeah,
seems like most people prefer listening to them.
David Foster Wallace. I don't know if you've ever read Infinite Jest, but he
No, I
has.
haven't.
I highly recommend it because it's like really funny and like like it'll break your heart, but it'll also like make you laugh. But there's like a point where he starts describing why video calls, and he's doing this in 1994, so video calls didn't exist. But he's talking about why video calls are so disturbing, because when you're on the phone with somebody, you don't have to give them your full attention, and they don't have to give it to you, but you can assume that you have their full attention. So he's talking about all these things that you're doing while you're on the phone and not paying attention to this person who you say you care about. And it's like shockingly accurate. And it describes exactly why I usually hate like FaceTime or something like that.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah, I'll send you the chapter because it's short, but it was like really, really accurate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds really cool. Yeah, I love it when fiction authors make such like profoundly accurate like analogies of society, like really awesome social commentaries. Like that's part of why 1984 is so awesome, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Foster Wallace especially, I think, hits on the selfishness aspect of humans in a way that other people have not quite grasped. Like we are totally and hopelessly wrapped up in ourselves, even when we think we aren't. And he describes it in so many different ways. I, always think about him when it's.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that chapter. Oh yeah, we should talk about, we haven't talked yet about how culture applies to food, like in that Ugly Delicious documentary. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Why don't you just give your own quick perception overall of that documentary?
So I really liked it. I watched it a while ago, but the episode that really stuck out to me was one where he's talking about Italian food and versus Chinese food. Because in America, especially, I'm assuming it's the same in Canada, but Chinese food is considered like a cheap, quick, like takeout meal. But Italian food, despite having once been considered cheap and quick and takeout, is now like elevated to this level of like a high class restaurant. So like you can spend a lot of money on an Italian meal, but you can't really do the same with Chinese. And he goes through the whole episode comparing certain foods. So he talks about like dumplings and gnocchi, which are this essentially the same thing, but one comes from China and one comes from Italy. And I think it actually hurt him a little to think about his own food being kind of like dismissed in a way. But it he made some really interesting comparisons and questioned a lot of things that I had never thought about. So I don't know if that's a good place.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I really liked how he basically examined like how many different cultures contribute to a particular dish or a particular style of food, like Italian food and Chinese food and every other type that he examines in the documentary, and how much they've been influenced by cultures other than Italian and Chinese, and then how much that goes into creating this like new perception. And then it's like it's constant cultural appropriation in a good way, which creates like all these amazing new dishes and amazing new styles of eating. And then the food has an influence on the culture, and the culture has an influence on the food, and that's an endless two-way relationship too.
Yeah, he did a really great job of illustrating that. Um, what was kind of shocking to me too is like almost all of like what we consider Italian food right now is from somewhere else. Like tomatoes aren't even from that area of the world at all. So it's kind of shocking to see that like the things that we would be offended by now are things that have been going on for so long and have found like fundamentally shaped our cultures. So it's odd to me that we're trying to stop it or control it in a way that is like sort of inorganic, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so interesting when they talk in that documentary about these unique food combinations that like aren't supposed to happen. Like I think one of them is like Vietnamese barbecue, which I think it's Vietnamese. It might be Korean, but I think it's Vietnamese food mixed with like oh, maybe it was Vietnamese crawfish or something like that. Like
I was gonna
it
say,
could,
is it
yeah, it can,
Louisiana Vietnamese?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, that one with like the crawfish mixed with Vietnamese food, like the Louisiana style, then those two mixed together. That was so fascinating.
yeah, there was like a seafood pho that was like like they were crawfish in it instead of like traditional fish or whatever. But I mean, he puts all the ingredients side by side and is like, there's no reason that these don't go together. You know, they're the same like palette. And the people he was talking to like kind of thought he was crazy because he was dissecting their work, you know, and they're just like,
You are
dude,
defying the food laws.
yeah.
Blasphemy.
They're like, we're just trying to like make a buck here. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's so awesome. Were there any other like different food combinations or other episodes that stood out to you?
there was one moment where he goes to a Japanese restaurant and the man is making, I think it's chicken wings. And he like he goes through like exactly what he's doing and like, you know, how he's seasoning it and whatever. And then he shows you how they've like opened the chicken wing to make it like easier for a person to eat. And then he starts crying and like I cried. And they basically just like show you that like this one chef is a complete master at what he does. And like he's thought of everything like to make it easier, to make it like taste better, to make the environment you're eating in better. And like somebody has given like really all of themselves to make like a chicken wing.
Yeah.
And we still have this like horrible perception that a chicken wing is what you get at like a crappy like dive bar, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another awesome thing about the documentary series too. Like it makes me have more respect for food and more respect for chefs. And what I love about it too is how and this is why I like started watching food shows recently. I never watched food shows before, but then I started watching ones like these that look at chefs as artists, which I find so awesome because it is like in art, like making this great, beautiful looking creation of food and like just using your creativity to make something delicious and beautiful.
Yeah, and how much work that goes into it. Because we think
Yeah.
that cooking is easy because you can do it for yourself, you know. Did you watch Chef's Table too?
I don't think I've watched that one yet. I think I watched Mind of a Chef, and I watched
Okay.
some of those old Anthony Bourdain ones that they put on Netflix too. But I like Mind of the Chef the most, other than Ugly Delicious too, and that has David Chang too, right?
Yeah, I think so. Chef's Table really shows you like the amount of sacrifice that goes into being sort of like a Michelin starred chef. Because a lot of them have like given up their entire family life, their entire like they just like that's the one thing that they do is they cook, and everything else
Oh,
comes secondary, and
oh
it's like
wow, I didn't
really
realize that.
intense.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
So
why
you'll like
is
that one too.
why is it that they have to make such incredible sacrifices?
I don't know. I don't know if it's the industry, because like a restaurant has to work on like during the times that people are usually off of work. So you're, um, but they also like pick people for the show that do things that are totally different. Like there's one guy who's living in, I think it was Argentina, and he's cooking on like open fires and sort of resurrecting these like sort of old methods of cooking. And so he has to be very far from, civilization, and his restaurant is kind of difficult to get to. And so he has like sort of a tenuous relationship with his daughter, and like has been divorced and whatever. So you kind of see like them giving up like a normal life to go do this rather bizarre thing out in the middle of nowhere. That's really amazing and people love it, but it's also like really taxing.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it sounds like I would really love that too.
Yeah, I think you would. And a lot of the restaurants are like kind of famous and you can go to them. Like, actually, what city are you near again? I just think
I guess
Canada. So,
I guess the city that I'm closest to is Edmonton in Alberta.
okay.
Yeah,
I know where Alberta is.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's good. A lot of people wouldn't.
Yeah,
Uh,
we had to memorize all the states and counties, not counties, but like the provinces.
provinces?
Yeah, at some
Okay.
point. I don't know if I could still like label them all, but I could get close, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I could name all 50 states.
Well,
Um, oh yeah, I was just thinking, one thing we I wanted to talk about, which we didn't get into that much earlier when we were talking about your experiences with religion, was your Catholic upbringing. I thought that would be really interesting to talk about because I don't really know that much about it because I was raised as like a Protestant Christian, basically in the United Church, which is kind of like a progressive Protestant denomination, which I think is exclusive to Canada.
okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what all the denominations of Protestantism are, because at least in America there seem to be a lot.
Yeah, I think there are tons overall, like literally hundreds.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. From what I can tell, they're all kind of like they roughly believe in the same thing as we do, which is just like, you know, God, Jesus, just without the Pope. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like that exciting. I just grew up in a very Irish Catholic area, but my family was Italian, so we were a little bit different, but very much the same. I went to Catholic schools. I did the whole like reading in church, like was a Eucharistic minister, which is the person who passes out the host, and
You
like did
pass
all
out,
those
you pass out the body of Christ and the
the
blood of Christ.
body and blood of Christ. Yeah, yeah. So it's not it doesn't feel that weird because everyone was doing it at the time. Like literally every other kid in your class does it except for, the 10 girls who are not Catholic or something. But it, I don't know, it wasn't that exciting. It was a nice upbringing. Like I had a very good community around me. I don't know. I never had like a good reason to hate the church, in the way that some people do, I think.
Okay. So it was just what you said about your experience in going to that college that made you question it a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I don't know if you know much about like Northeast US, but it's just not a very religious part of the country in general. And most of the people were from that area as well, because it was in upstate New York.
Okay. No, I don't really know that much at all about like the cultural differences based on geographical location, basically, I guess, in
Yeah,
America.
I'd say the Midwest has a lot more like Catholics in general, and then the South is more like Baptist, and then the West kind of has more. Well, there's atheists on the West Coast too, but then you've got like all the Mormons out in Utah. So there are definitely like geographical pockets of certain religions, um, with some kind of variance, I guess. But the Northeast is pretty not very religious at all. So I was probably one of the more religious people in the class, for sure. And people thought it was weird too. So
Okay.
yeah.
Did you ever like believe the religious tenets, I guess you would call them? Like, did you ever believe them any more than you do now, or anything like that?
Yeah, when I was younger, I think I took it as like a truth. Then you start kind of thinking, well, maybe there were certain things that weren't exactly true or happened differently, or um, because Catholics don't really believe that the Old Testament of the Bible is strictly speaking true always. They kind of take that as more of like a parable, and are more into the New Testament. So like if Jesus said it, it's definitely true. But if like God is smiting the infidels or whatever, then that might be more of a story to help you learn or something.
Oh, see, I had what might be like a Christian misconception about that. I thought that that's the way that Protestants were, but that Catholics were more into the Old Testament. So that's really interesting.
Not from my upbringing. Yeah, not no. I don't think there's anything like in Leviticus or like that we would follow for sure. Like um, things like Jonah and the whale and like Job and all those kinds of like stories are just not. They're not seen as like an accurate. Um, they're not seen as an accurate historical fact. They're seen as like something that somebody wrote to kind of inspire other people to like be a good Catholic, I guess.
Oh, okay. So like the maybe the Orthodox and Baptist people would have the more like, I guess, stereotypically traditional or conservative interpretations of Christianity, would you say?
I think so. There's also so the Vatican Council of what was it, 1962 or something? It was the Second Vatican Council. They definitely changed a lot of the doctrine on some of these things, and that was when Mass stopped being in Latin and was done in the local language. So they also changed a lot of these kind of very strict ideas. So like you didn't have to cover your hair anymore in church, and
Oh, I didn't even realize that was a rule.
yeah, back in the day, like women would wear like veils or hats, kind of just sort of like the English church does. That's like their holdover from that.
Oh, okay.
um,
That sounds like a
yeah.
similarity between Christianity and Islam almost.
Yep, yeah. There's actually a lot of stuff like that, yeah. um, but I mean, it was never, you didn't have to have like all of your hair covered. I guess it was just kind of like something on your head. But in the 60s, the church definitely like loosened up a little bit. And I think throughout history, the church does that in like, they'll have like one meeting and say, okay, we're going to move forward and all of this stuff is going to be changed. And then they go on for another like 100 years. And then they have another meeting and they're like, okay, I guess we'll change some more. So it's very slow, but also all at once sometimes.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting like how much more I learn about different religions like Catholicism or different interpretations of different religions, however you look at them. The more you learn about them, the more fascinating it is, and the more you realize that they're different than the way that you thought that they were.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. Because So I've met a bunch of Mormons recently and had some, misconceptions, I guess. And they seem to be a lot more chill than I previously thought.
Oh, I thought that's a stereotype that I already had of them, that they're all like super friendly and that kind of thing.
Yeah, like they're friendly, but I had this perception that they were very much involved in the church and that the church really dictated what they did day to day. I mean, it's just like us, where it's, yeah, you go to church and then the rest of the week you're at work and you're at the gym and you're at like other things and, you know.
Oh, that's interesting because I guess maybe my stereotypes have been strengthened because my brother's girlfriend, uh she used to be really Mormon, and she was raised as really Mormon in an extremely Mormon family, and they had to like it was all of these preconceptions that people have about Mormonism, that she had to go to church several times a week or something like that, and she always had to follow all these like antiquated religious rules, like every like as conservative as you can possibly think, to as of an interpretation of Mormonism, basically.
Yeah, but there's people like even in the church who still believe in really old school stuff. So I think like everyone just has like some weirdos and some like more relaxed people and um I mean, I don't know, like if you talk to my grandma who's really really religious, she like works at the church and cleans it up and like serves soup at the soup kitchen every week and that kind of thing. She would tell you that everything in the Bible is factually true always. But she's also 80. So like there's a huge difference between like her and my mom, who is very religious but is not quite that extreme.
Yeah, like I've talked about this many times before already, but like for example, with someone like my mom, her interpretation of Christianity is like as hippie of an interpretation as you can possibly imagine, basically. Like, and my dad shares most of her views, I would say. Like, they don't have any problems with abortion or anything like that, which when I told this to Sam's bulldog the other day, he found this really surprising. and
Yeah.
uh, and I think they
I
both
think
believe that God is a woman, and like they don't believe that uh that Mary Magdalene was a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus. They don't like the
Mary
when they've
Magdalene
talked.
didn't give birth to Jesus.
Oh,
Just
not Mary Magdalene, the wrong
yeah.
Mary. Sorry, sorry, the wrong Mary.
I
The
just have to correct you on that
Yeah,
one.
you're right. You're right. That's a totally different
Yeah.
Mary. But they don't have like any of these like like basically all that they believe about Christianity like is that Jesus is a good example of someone to follow. And my mom really likes going to church, mostly still for the sense of community that it gives her.
Yeah, and I would say she's probably one of a lot of people who feel that way. And like, yeah, maybe they've stumbled across some contradictions, but it doesn't bother them that much because they get so much out of the community as it is. And I think Sam's bulldog, his name is Ed, right?
Yes,
Okay,
I call him Sam's bulldog all the
yeah,
time.
I always forget. Um, but I think he misses the fact that not everyone in the religion is reading exactly what the Pope says. And in Catholicism, we have a book called the Catechism, which lays out all the doctrines. And most people have never read that. They might not even know that it actually exists. So you have to really like temper your ideas, because most people are not following the religion as strictly as you think they should be following them.
Yeah, this is why, like, when militant atheists like Sam Harris say things like, yeah, it just means that people are being less Christian, or did you know that in this religion it's people believe this crazy shit, but like most people in the way they interpret their religions are not fundamentalists, in my opinion.
No, they're usually really lax about how they interpret it. Um, yeah, I did love the podcast you did with Ed and Dee Canfield, because
Oh yeah, me too.
it was a good discussion, but then I loved how sometimes like Ed was like, all right, like you young whippersnappers, like let me tell you how the world is. And
Yeah.
that was fun. That was a good dynamic.
Yeah, I love talking with Ed. And it was great. It was great when he and Dee talked to each other, especially since they found even more common ground than I thought they would, which is always what's great about these conversations.
Yeah. No, I mean, most people have grown up in some kind of religious, you know, they have some sort of tradition. So I think you can usually like, um, I mean, they're analogous, right? Like you can say like, oh, well, my family did this and your family did something similar. So you can actually find something, at least with religion, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Like Catholicism and Protestant Christianity, they're still technically the same religion, right? So like
Yeah.
it's all of the same, it's a lot anyway of the same doctrine, almost regardless of your interpretation. I mean, you could have and you could have two wildly different interpretations of Catholicism because like you were talking about, people and like I talk about often, people pick and choose what they believe regardless of what belief system they're following, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like they're not doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing all the time. You can't. I
Yeah,
think
it's
like
like have you read that book called The Year of Living Biblically?
no, I haven't.
I forget what the fucking author's name is, but he's been on Tim Ferriss's podcast. He basically he's a journalist who does these experiments, basically like these self experiments, and then writes books about them. So for this one, he tried to follow the Bible to the letter for
Is
one
this the
year.
guy who read the dictionary?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I read his dictionary book. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I haven't read that one. What did you think of it?
Or no, he read the Encyclopedia
Yeah,
Britannica.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It was actually really funny.
yeah.
And it was hilarious because he actually like he realized he didn't actually get anything useful out of it.
Oh, okay.
Like in terms of the actual knowledge that's in the encyclopedia.
It sounds like a really boring way to get your information.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I don't
But
know if I'd want to live like the Bible, but
it was it was a really entertaining book, and I think he came away with basically that kind of conclusion too. Like he said, like he went to stone adulterers once, so he got these tiny little pebbles, and and he would throw them at people on the beach, and he would do all these crazy things, like he would I think he didn't have sex with his wife for a month because it said something like that in the Bible, and he let his beard grow out completely, and he started wearing a robe because he had to wear only one different type of fabric. It was really bizarre and interesting.
yeah, um I like commend him for trying because it is kind of nuts like in the context of our lives now. But I guess at one point that would have been easy to do. But I think I also, there's a statistic like 88% of Catholics use some kind of artificial birth control. And that's
Oh,
like
that's
a
really
big no
interesting.
no. So clearly there's a lot of picking and choosing.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's really interesting. I didn't know that
yeah,
because people say this all the time about how Catholics hate birth control, right?
that's what they say. And then everyone's quietly putting their daughter on it at age 16. Like, yeah, there was,
That's why
I,
what you do with your beliefs is more important than what you believe.
well, the funny thing too was that in high school, I remember everyone was taking birth control for their acne or for their cramps or like headaches or like whatever, like weird excuse you like had, but it just like it happened anyway. So
Yeah, one of my female friends, like legitimately takes it to regulate her periods, so they're more, because otherwise they happen like too randomly for her to predict for them or something like that.
yeah, I mean, there is a lot of shit that goes wrong, or not wrong, but is just a pain in the ass. But it is kind of funny when people are preaching one thing and then definitely doing a different thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So
it's funny.
that's
Like
why, like,
it reminds me of that Monty Python song in The Life of Brian. Every sperm is sacred.
exactly, yeah.
And then there's that family with like 60 kids or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There's always one family who has like 8 children, and the parents are like 34, and you're like, oh my god. But it's totally, yeah, no. It's way more lax than people like give us credit for, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting how different people's perceptions are on abortion too. Like we've talked about this a lot on a few of the mixed mental arts chats, but like there's the stereotypical liberal way of looking at it and the stereotypical conservative way of looking at it, and then obviously everything in between. But the two polar opposites are basically like you cherish the unborn child, and then the other side, you cherish the woman's body and her choice of what to do with her body. But you both have empathy, you just have empathy for different parts of the equation or scenario or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's a little confusing to me because that particular question seems like we should definitely find some sort of middle ground. Um, like if you say one or the other, that just doesn't make sense to me. Like,
Yeah, I totally agree. Like uh I think that everyone should have the right to have an abortion, but i- if you're if you're like 6 or 7 months pregnant and you don't need to have an abortion, that seems like a fucked up thing to do. But then again, like there are complications sometimes late in a pregnancy where you have to choose between the life of the mother and the life of the child. That's why this all gets so complicated, right?
right. And you end up making laws based on like one scenario that happens, every now and then. It's not really a common occurrence. So I think in general, we can say, yeah, like there's probably a limit in terms of time, but I don't think we should make it illegal for sure. Because I think it is proven, right, that like infanticide goes up when abortion is made illegal.
Yeah, I
I think
think so.
that's,
Like
yeah,
people just like when you make drugs illegal, people do it anyway.
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm all for like legalizing most stuff. Um, in general, there's a few things that I might say I don't know, but
See, that's one of the few things that I have like a strong position on, I guess you could say. I think that all drugs should be legalized, even the ones that people view as the most dangerous. Because even if you, like with cocaine, for example, uh, like part of the reason that it's more harmful than it needs to be is that it's illegal. So people mix like gasoline rather and all these fucking adulterants and shit with it. And I mean, it's not the best idea to do cocaine, but according to people like Dr. Carl Hart, who's been on Joe Rogan's podcast, and a few other doctors like that too. Not that I'm saying I'm an expert or anything, of course, but like if you do cocaine that isn't adulterated with all this shit, apparently it's not the best for you, but as long as you don't like overdose or something like that, it'll just lead to like heart problems or something like that if you're a moderate cocaine user. And I don't know how difficult it is to be a moderate cocaine user, but my point is that like even with like cocaine or heroin or something like that, it seems like it's safer if they're legal. Like there are places where there are heroin clinics or something like that, and people can go and get clean needles and like heroin that isn't adulterated with other shit. So it's safer than it would be otherwise, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, in Ohio, the opioid crisis was really, really bad. It still is really bad, and it is everywhere. But it was especially bad there in some of the more rural communities. And I think most of the overdoses were caused by fentanyl being cut with the heroin, because it was like street drugs. So people were
That sounds like
overdosing
a
on
fucked up
fentanyl.
drug.
Yeah. Yeah, so it wasn't really a heroin problem that was killing everyone. So I think you're right there. My worry would just be giving people license to infinitely create bizarre chemicals in the lab that make us like. But I guess we already have that ability anyway.
Yeah, like to an
People.
extent at least that's happening now. Like
Yeah.
they make these drugs illegal, and then people create ones that are almost chemically identical, but they have this slight alteration, and they keep endlessly doing that as they make more chemicals illegal, because there are lots of brilliant chemists on the black market, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. At least decriminalizing things would be a step in the right direction, because I don't think jail is the best form of rehab.
Yeah, like decriminalizing would be a hell of a lot easier too, because then you don't have to like set up places where people can buy it and tax it and regulate it and stuff like that. Which I am in favor of, but it seems like I'm sure you're aware that most people, at least according to what I've heard, the vast majority of people particularly in America and all the overcrowded prisons are there for nonviolent drug offenses, which just makes no sense to me.
Yep. Yeah. I think most of the time, people who are in prison probably shouldn't be there because they're not doing anything that's really harming the community. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not in criminal justice, so I can't really speak to that. But
I'm sure not either.
yeah.
I wouldn't want to be either.
Yeah, I mean, if it came up on a ballot, I'd probably vote for decriminalization. So I haven't had the opportunity yet.
Yeah.
Weed was already legalized in DC when I moved here, so
That's good.
we have that. Yeah.
That's gonna happen soon in Canada, I think. I think it might be delayed, but at least Justin Trudeau said that he was going to legalize weed by Canada Day 2018, although I heard that that might be delayed, so we'll see.
He seems like he would legalize weed.
Yeah, that's like one of the only things that I like about him, to be honest. Although I did vote for him, so he
Oh,
seemed
did
better.
you?
Yeah, he seemed better than the alternatives, like the NDP guy, which is it's kind of the equivalent of the socialist or far left party in Canada. He seemed too much that way for me. And then the other guy who was prime minister at the time, he was too conservative for me, Stephen Harper. And so Justin Trudeau seemed like in the middle between those two. And I wanted to vote for someone, so I just voted for him, mostly because he said that he was going to legalize weed, and he was the only person who said that he was going to repeal these laws put forth by Stephen Harper. One of them, it was something to do with how it goes after particularly the prostitutes in prostitution cases, so it targets the prostitutes instead of the people paying for the prostitutes. And then there was also this other law that he instituted when he was prime minister, which was something about how if you're a second generation Canadian, if your parents are from another country, then you can be deported at any time, because anything you do or say can be viewed as like protesting the government or something like that.
So, do you guys not have birthright citizenship?
I think we do now. I think that was repealed. But that
seems
was,
very extreme.
yeah, well, that was in place for a while. Like, as much as I like some aspects of Canada more than America, like living in a parliamentary system is like, based on what's extremely small amount I know about how the government works, because all I did was like, I've read one textbook and I've listened to some podcasts and stuff like that, so I don't know very much about it at all. But it seems like it has its benefits in comparison to the American system, but then it also has its setbacks, like any system, really, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. There, I don't really like protests, but there are only a few things that would actually have me at a protest, and I think birthright citizenship is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
For sure. So I didn't realize that had happened.
Well, and one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson got so upset was that uh, I'm not sure if Justin Trudeau had anything to do with it, actually, but in Ontario, in the first place, they literally instituted these laws where you have to call someone by their gender pronoun. And like, in terms of the freedom of speech issue, I'm less extreme on that than it used to be. I used to be like a really militant, I guess, pro free speech person, I guess you could say, but I'm less extreme about that than I used to, because I always try to be less extreme about things. But I mean, I don't think that people should be you should be legally required to call someone by their preferred gender pronoun. I'll call someone whatever they want to be called, but I don't think I should be legally required to do that.
Right, I agree with you there. Yeah, I think it's definitely a polite thing to do, but a huge government overstep to even be involved in something like that. But I know my biases are definitely on the conservative side, I think. I
Oh,
guess.
they
I don't
are?
know. I'm not sure anymore.
Oh, okay.
I did have my college was very feminist. It's a historically all female school, but it was co-ed since the 60s. So I definitely like have some feminist tendencies. Um, but I I still like I still kind of mistrust the government a lot.
Oh, okay. Well, it sounds like that's something that we have in common, actually, because I kind of mistrust government a lot too.
Yeah.
Like, like I agree with a lot of Thaddeus Russell's criticism of government power and stuff like that, and he got me interested in reading about postmodernism through Foucault and stuff like that, and he's really good at criticizing power structures and stuff like that when you actually read the stuff that he talks about. And as much as I'm not like politically an anarchist or anything like that, I like a lot of what Michael Malice says about it, who's been on mixed mental arts too.
Yeah, I love both of them, and I just especially love hearing their perspectives because they've come from something so extreme. So when you see people like reacting against something, not that they're I don't think they're very reactionary. I think they're both generally like well thought out opinions. Um,
For sure.
but
Yeah.
hearing there was something on the spotlight chat that we really hit on, that stuck with me, is that there's people who are in the group and then there's the outsiders, and we're both inside a group or outside a group depending on our environment, but we do have a responsibility in both cases to pick out like what is negative about the group, but we also have a responsibility to recognize which piece we have to look at the time. And I think Thaddeus Russell does a pretty good job of that. And I think Michael Malice also does a good job, although he can be a little bit more. Um, I think he says things to like get a
Overly
rise out of
critical,
people. Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
half trolly-ish.
yeah, exactly. But I do
Or
think he,
like how he wrote an article about like shitting all over cops, basically.
right, yeah, but I think he recognizes when he's doing that. So
Yeah,
I,
and I think like that being said too, like you said, I'm a huge fan of his too, and I like the way that he does that too. He like says things to piss people off, and I think society, how my perception has changed on that too, basically, is that kind of thing used to piss me off, but now I kind of think that it's like a necessary part of society, and I even like troll people sometimes just to try to provoke critical thinking, even though it's like kind of a dick kind of thing to do.
I think if it's done thoughtfully, it can be really useful. If it's just because you want to piss people off, then no, I'm not a fan.
Yeah,
um,
I mean, like the way that Michael Malice does it, it obviously does get people to think, right? Like he says these
yeah,
extreme
he's
things
great
about
at it.
cops, and
He's a
he
good
makes some
troll.
good points, and he's right about a lot of what he says, and then he says some stuff that some people will disagree with, and then it'll make them think about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But then you have people like Trump who is just saying things because he feels like pissing people off, you know?
Yeah, yeah. He's like the worst example of a troll. And the
It's not
funny
a good
thing is
troll.
that people don't understand that half of what he said is trolling.
Exactly. I mean, like most stories have like kind of like a trickster or whatever you want to call them. And it's just somebody who kind of gets the like story rolling in a specific direction. And they didn't actually like, they were just kind of being a dick.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Trump's good. I've never thought about that before, but yeah, if you look at like mythologies or something too, like Trump is kind of like Loki, for example, but
Yeah.
much less Machiavellian, perhaps. Although it's interesting to view arguments like Scott Adams' arguments about how he might be more Machiavellian than he seems too. Although I don't necessarily 100% agree with them, but it's really interesting to hear those sorts of arguments.
I cannot listen to Scott Adams. He just,
No?
no.
What
I
annoys you about him?
I really have tried. The people that annoy me most are the people who seem really, really arrogant and totally unwilling to entertain other points of view. So he's one of them. um,
Oh, I
and,
see what
and
you
it's
mean. Yeah.
especially like he's willing to defend like stuff that's totally undefendable, and that's not helpful. Like you can be a troll and still like accept that like shit that Trump's doing is actually bad.
I don't think
Not
he's
all of it.
trolling. What sort of stuff do you not like when he defends it?
Um, so I guess like some of the like incessant tweeting and I haven't listened to him since the actual election time, so I can't quite remember. But I just remember thinking like, what an arrogant like son of a bitch, like you're not defending any real idea or any real stance on something. So
There's an interesting Sam Harris podcast with him. It's really interesting because they're both so arrogant. Like
yeah, I think
Scott
I listened
Adams
to
Scott Adams is like really arrogantly like defending Trump, and Sam Harris is really like arrogantly talking about how evil he is. So I thought that one was really entertaining.
I listened to like the first 20 minutes of that and was just like, oh my God, I can't. This is impossible. So it was like the Sam Harris Ezra Klein debate where I got through maybe a half an hour and really just couldn't. It, it was shocking to me that they couldn't hear themselves acting like they knew absolutely everything about the world. Um, but I guess these people get a platform for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it was that's
Yeah.
why like one of the things that I said about it when I posted my thoughts on that debate on the Mixed Mental Arts page was that it was so funny that like they both had such profound naive realism that they could not possibly try to see the other person's perspective. So like half of it was like two apes throwing poo at each other.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it was kind of astonishing for people who are so smart to not be able to put themselves in another person's shoes, because that's fundamentally like what we're trying to do, and it's a mental exercise. It's not some like hippy dippy like thing to do.
Yeah.
It's your brain.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of helps you in critical thinking, I think, to like
Yeah.
actually realistically consider another person's perspective. It
Right.
helps you learn a lot.
And to understand a different kind of motivation. Because for me, like I think we talked about this in the beginning, like we're both sort of motivated by like wanting to be smarter or be seen as being smart. But some people don't want that. They have other motivations. So to just assume that everyone thinks like you is really putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. Like it's really good to just assume that people are not as excited about what excites you and that people are excited by a whole wide variety of different things, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, so I actually played golf growing up. My dad was like a big golfer, and so all my sisters played as well. And the guy who ran the golf course that was like our home course, um, he loved plants and grass and like trees. And he and my dad would sit there and talk for like hours about what they're planting, what they're doing with the plants, like how he has to take care of them. Like, and I would just sit there being like, this is the most boring thing ever. But to like this guy, like that was his life, is like taking care of plants. And so you start to realize, like as you're growing up, that there are people who are so totally different from you, even if they grew up in maybe the same environment.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I like I'm not like a huge fan of gardening or anything like that, but I do it sometimes. Like my mom likes to plant a garden every year usually, and I usually help her with it, and it's really cool to get like fresh vegetables from your own garden and stuff like that. And I like nature and stuff like that too, like going outside in the backyard to read my book or going for a walk in the forest by my house and stuff like that. And I can totally understand how people would be like totally in love with nature or gardening or stuff like that too.
Yeah, I've started to come around to that point of view. I lived in New York City for 3 years and absolutely loved every second of it. So I don't I don't know like if I'll get to the point where I want like a garden or like a large lawn or something, but maybe a
Oh,
window
that's
box one
interesting.
day.
That's interesting. Like from based on just what I've heard about New York City, uh, then I've never been there, but my brother has visited there twice. So just based on what I've heard from him and many other people, it sounds like it wouldn't really be my kind of place to live because I like a slower pace and being like having nature around and it sounds like it's really fast paced and that kind of stuff there. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very there's so many people around you. Like I don't even know how to explain that to somebody because I didn't understand it until I moved there. There's just so many fucking people. um, so like when you have that many people, there's really never any quiet time or downtime. Like you can be out on the street at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday and there's still like tons of people walking around. Um, so
Oh, okay.
it's
I
really
wouldn't mind
unique.
that. I wouldn't mind that as much, I think, because I tend to be really nocturnal. But
Yeah, yeah. Like I kind of liked that. I like having a little bit of noise when I'm sleeping, so that didn't really bother me. But it's also it is really fast. Like there's a lot going on, and you really have to make decisions quickly. Finding an apartment, you have to make a decision on the spot. You can't really think things over.
oh,
uh,
okay.
but
So
it depends on the industry you're in too.
is part
So.
of the reason that you like that because like that's the type of person you are too? Like, do you like to like do things quickly and that kind of thing?
No, I think I just like having people around. Like I don't like I wouldn't like to live by myself. I like having people in my apartment and like doing stuff and noise and like the first thing I do when I come home is turn on the TV just to have something in the background going on or like a podcast or whatever. So I like being in cities, but New York really starts to wear on you psychologically because you have no personal space.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
That's
I
maybe
mean,
a little more extreme than I need.
okay. Yeah, I mean, like it sounds like we might be different in that way in terms of like you liking noise and stuff like that. Because I guess I prefer silence most of the time. But also, I mean, even though I'm a fairly introverted person, I would never want to live by myself either. Like I like having like at least a small group of friends that I know really well and I see on a fairly regular basis. And I wouldn't want to like I like having people around and like living in the same place as me, basically.
Sorry, my thing cut out for a minute there. But I think I heard most of what you said. Yeah, I like having people around me. I don't know if I could do silence in my house, but whatever, it's fine.
So what do you think of meditation then?
I am not that into it. I think my version of meditation is some kind of like working out. Like I think that's the closest I can get. But also like coding, you can get into kind of like a flow state doing coding work pretty easily. Um, and then recently, I've taken up sketching again because I used to do that when I was younger. And so I just like bought a new book and some pencils and whatever. So I've been doing that, which is another way to kind of get into flow. I don't know if that's the same as meditation, but
Well, I mean, it's not quite the same, but there are lots of things like that there that are very meditative when you do them.
mhm.
So, and like I'm not like someone that says that everyone has to meditate or anything like that. I do it myself every day in like a completely secular context, basically, just because I've I've heard like scientists talk about how good it can be for you. So I just like to do that just to like give my mind a break, and it seems to help with my concentration ability and stuff like that too. But I also do lots of things like that that are really meditative. Like writing for me might be similar to coding for you, and I often get really meditative when I do workouts too. So yeah, I mean there's definitely value in doing that stuff, and like not everyone needs to meditate too, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm uncomfortable with myself. I think I just don't want to do it. um, I don't know why exactly, but it's just, yeah. I mean, I'll probably give it another shot at some point, but haven't been that successful yet.
Oh, you've tried it though?
I've tried it, yeah, yeah, because I've
Oh,
heard the
okay.
same thing. Is that like it's super helpful and like clears your mind and helps you work better and but I just can't like the like I would wake up and like the thought of meditating is just dread inducing.
Well, like, did you try any particular kind?
No, I was just doing like so I think I read somewhere that I'm forgetting who it was now. Some like he was like a business kind of person, like some Silicon Valley guy. I can't remember who it was. But they basically just like try to meditate for as long as they can. And even if that's like 30 seconds, then that's their baseline. And then every day you just try to do it a little bit longer. So you like set a timer and just try to like sit there and like clear your mind. And then when the timer goes off, you're done. Um, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that was worth anything,
That's
but I
fair enough.
tried. So,
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, part of like part of why I do it is like you were saying, like I do feel uncomfortable with myself a lot of the time, and I get like subconscious, and I worry too much, and I get depressed about things that I don't need to get depressed about, which, and I mean, there's not necessarily anything wrong with feeling badly about stuff, but sometimes I have problems with it. So it seems like it's one of the many things that I do. that helps with that. So it's hard to say like how much of an effect it has, because I do a lot of those same things that you do, or similar ones, like I said, like writing and working out, and reading, especially when you read fiction, can be really meditative too. So I do lots of things like that. For I mean, those obviously aren't the only reasons that I do all those things. I do them for all the other good reasons too. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting practice. Yeah, that's that's all I can say about that.
Okay. Oh, the only other thing that we didn't get to talk about yet was physics a little bit, because I know you said you
Yeah.
have at least an undergraduate degree in it, and I'm
Yep.
not I'm really fucking, this is something that I've started to try to improve lately in myself, which is my math skills, because I've always been kind of bad at that. But one thing I learned in part from mixed mental arts is that it's not necessarily that I'm just like destined to be bad at math or anything. So I've been trying to improve my math skills in more recent years. But what fascinates me in particular about physics is just like reading all these books by theoretical physicists like Lawrence Krauss and Neil deGrasse Tyson and people like that, and just like how fascinating it is how physics works, and like quantum mechanics and string theory, and just like regular, like applicable physics to everyday life too, and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I mean it's a broad subject. I was always interested in astronomy. So when I was younger, I was like really into like stargazing and going to the planetarium. And so that was kind of how I got into that in college. But then I worked in the optics lab. So we were shooting lasers at worms. They're like these microscopic worms called C. elegans that kind of they they can mirror human neurons in a lot of ways. So they're used in a lot of different kinds of experiments. And so we would,
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah, they're really interesting. We would shoot them with lasers and then measure like the diffraction patterns. And that was also how I started coding, because we wrote these little scripts to kind of transform the diffraction pattern into like the shape of the worm, so that we could tell based on the pattern what the worm was doing. And then somehow that was useful for someone in the biology department. I don't actually know how, but
Oh, okay. I was gonna ask you about that, about whether someone was using that information to learn about neurons.
yeah, our professor at the time had a connection with one of the biologists. Um, I really never got that side of the story, which happens a lot in science. But it was kind of a cool little experiment.
Oh, you must be much more familiar, like through your personal experience, with what Hunter talks about a lot, about how different fields of science don't communicate with each other.
Yep, big time. Yeah. No, I had a lot of what he says really resonates with my experience. Um, so like at work right now, we have a lot of biologists and statisticians and people in different fields, and they actually make a really strong effort to like bring us all together, and the biologists will give a presentation and say, this is our ultimate goal, and this is how each of you guys is contributing and why we need you to like keep doing this work. So I feel like I'm in a good environment for that now, but that is not true of every environment.
Oh,
It's
okay. Well, it's good that you're in a good environment now, but yeah, I bet that's the
yeah.
case.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of times you just kind of hear that somebody needs you to do something and you do it, and it might be interesting in its own right, but you certainly don't hear whatever became of it, unless you're really paying attention. Um, and a lot of times it takes like years to publish a paper, so you're not necessarily, like something might happen down the road, but by then you've moved on and done something different. So there's not a lot of continuity and like experiments sometimes.
Yeah, it's that also reminds me of another thing Hunter often says about how like the results of scientific studies are not widely publicized at all. Like people don't, it's hard for people to actually find out about the recent findings of science unless they read them through articles like second or third hand or something like that later on.
Yeah, there's a lot of paywalls. And even if you can get your hands on the study, it's written in a language that most people can't understand. They don't know, like, I think the term science literacy would address this other aspect, which is that people don't really know what the scientific method is. So they don't know that, like, you kind of have to have like a set way of doing things. And aside from discovering like whether or not your hypothesis is correct, you're not doing a whole lot more within a study. You know, it's a very there's a narrow scope, so you can't just say like you can't make wide sweeping conclusions from one study. And I think people are really inclined to want to do that, especially with things like health studies. I mean, that's the joke, is like caffeine's both good and bad for you, and drinking is both good and bad for you, and like, you know,
Yeah, I
so
choose to believe that coffee is good for me, but drinking is bad for me. So I drink coffee every day, but I try to avoid alcohol.
I drink a lot of both. So
But I mean, like you said, like even it seems like a lot of research suggests that moderate alcohol consumption can be good for you, right?
it seems that way. It seems like moderate caffeine is good for you, but people also process these things differently. So your individual like makeup might mean that, you know, alcohol is actually really bad for you, and you have to like
Yeah,
take these
exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to listen to your own body. Like, I personally can eat dairy, but lots of people can't. So it doesn't mean dairy is good or bad. It means it
Yeah. Yeah,
exists.
that's a good point too,
Yeah.
because actually, like, I got into like following a ketogenic diet, and before that, I followed like a paleo diet, and like it seemed that I got really tribal about nutrition for a while. I became like a food Nazi for a while, really. I was like really judgmental of people who didn't follow my sacred way of eating, really, because the diet that I switched to worked so well for me, because I used to have like terrible acne, and the and like cutting out dairy and bread and stuff like that gradually got rid of it. I mean, so there were a lot of other things that are supposedly beneficial for my health that I was doing at the same time, so it's hard to tell how much of effect that they had, but they had those benefits for me. So then I just had this naive realism and thinking like, oh, well, everyone should just eat like me. Why the fuck would you not eat the way I do? And that's one thing that I've learned in more recent years too. It's that I I follow this diet because it works for me. It doesn't really matter how other people eat. They should do what works for them, basically.
Yeah, I was like that too. I did CrossFit for a few years. And so they're extremely strict about paleo. I don't think it's totally ketogenic, but it's definitely a very strict diet. It's basically Whole30.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's similar to ketogenic, but it's like less fat basically.
I think that's basically what it is. But I remember being so tired all the time because I wasn't eating any carbs, and like I absolutely need some kind of carb in my in my life. And I actually ended up gaining weight, which was kind of weird, and sort of like counterintuitive to what everybody tells you these days. So I don't know, it didn't work for me.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely got to do what works for you. And even like, even though those types of diets like paleo and ketogenic diets, they advocate for like eating almost no carbs, I still like once I've made so many changes to my diet, and then like I gradually ended up adjusting it to the point where usually I still do like intermittent fasting all the time, but like I still eat a little bit of the supposedly healthy types of carbs with supper every night. Like I'll have like sweet potato or rice, just a little bit of something like that. I think it's partially because maybe partially at least because of my body type, because I don't know how true these different type body types are, but there are supposedly at least like the ectomorph and the endomorph and the mesomorph. And I think I'm more like an ectomorph. I tend to be like naturally kind of small and have trouble gaining weight. Although I did gradually eventually go from like 170 all the way to 230 when I was training in powerlifting for a while. But anyway, I think it was really fucking hard for me to do that. So I think that even if it's true only to a degree, that seems to be kind of true for me.
Yeah, I don't know about those types either. I've heard of them too, but there's definitely a genetic component to all of this. And I mean, it depends on what your ancestors ate, probably, or what they had available to them. So it's interesting, and I think it's going to get even more personal because I've personally seen that medicine is becoming more personalized just in my lifetime, but like obviously not enough. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's right anymore.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
no, that's a good point. Yeah, I feel the same way. Like even though like with everything, when I talk with Hayden Bruce about pragmatism, for example, I often say like basically I live my life in a pragmatic way. I do things because I think that there's a good reason to do them, but I'm not necessarily convinced that I'm right about literally anything. I think that there's always a possibility that I could be wrong about everything that I believe. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. And this, like, you see this in small ways too. Like in DC, if you stand on the left side of the escalator, everyone gets mad at you because that's for people who are walking up the escalator, and standers should be on the right.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I've
that's just
heard
like,
something like that before, but I've never heard about people being so strict about it.
oh, it's really militant. So like if you do that in another place in the country, like nobody notices or whatever. But I still now, after being here 3 years, I go home and I feel so uncomfortable standing on the left side of the escalator because I feel like I'm in everyone's way. But that doesn't
But
exist
does
in Ohio.
anyone care when you go home?
No, nobody in Ohio cares. Nobody's walking up an escalator. But in DC, that's a thing. So, like you see, like this, I guess what we were talking about with food and culture, like these things kind of just permeate all of life, and you don't know how much is being affected.
Yeah, and then
So
you think that they're normal because they seem normal to you and they seem normal to everyone else, and then you like you were just describing, you go somewhere else and there's a new normal.
right. So like with the like low carb thing that kind of like took over everywhere for a while, you started seeing all these restaurants popping up that were like vegetarian or low carb or like whatever they were supposed to be. And then there was like a backlash against that. And now there's a million different kinds of burger places. And so it just, you can see the cycles if you're paying attention. But if you're not, you just think, oh, well, this is normal now. And you don't consider it.
Yeah, totally. And that's almost reflected in most of the things that we're talking about. Like you could say that about politics, food, culture, nutrition, people people and religion of course too. People get or lack thereof, like atheists. Like you get tribal about stuff and then you get naive realism about your worldview, and you're in a world, you're in a group that has the same naive realism. So that's why it's important to, like you were talking about, being an individual is important, but being in a group is important too. This is exactly one point that I was talking about with Ed and D Canfield the other day too, which is one of the common themes that I talk about a lot lately, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something on the group that I noticed that it had never occurred to me before, that we change clothing styles a lot and for no apparent reason. um,
Oh, really?
yeah, I mean, like in this day and age, at least maybe women change a lot more than men do. Um, but like you can kind of track like fashion cycles, like whatever jean skirts were in the 90s and now they're coming back and everybody's wearing jean skirts again. So like you can see this in everything. It's in food, it's in clothing, it's in like thought processes. And I keep running into more things that this is that are cyclical like this, that are changing constantly, and that I don't even notice. Because when somebody said that to me, I was like, "What do you mean we don't change clothes all the time? We absolutely do." Like after 2 or 3 years, some of my clothes start to look kind of weird and outdated.
Oh, that's weird. I must be. I mean, that makes sense. Not that's weird. That's like maybe I just have bad fashion sense or something, because I feel like I have the same, like, I don't know, like dirtbag style, I guess you could call it, most of the time. Although like I've talked, I think maybe a few times before, about I've been influenced by other people, like friends and girlfriends and stuff like that, have like encourage me to dress up more and stuff like that. So every once in a while, like if I'm going to do tutoring or something like that, or if I'm going out for dinner, or if I'm going out to a bar or something like that, which I hardly ever do anymore, but I used to do all the time. Like I used to have a friend who would take me to bars a lot, and that got me into like dressing up a little better, because he always liked to do that when we would go out to bars. And then I've had like girlfriends or other people that have like wanted to dress me up a little bit or something like that. So I've done that before too.
Yeah, girls like doing that, I think. Um, but I think, yeah, I think men probably change their clothing a lot less than women do. But like, it's, I mean, it's pretty extreme, and there's no reason for it. I don't know
And and
why.
and like in like everything, it depends on the man and the woman too, right? Like
Yeah,
one of my really good friends, for example, he like really likes to dress up, and he's always like really concerned with how his hair looks and stuff like that. And you know, like I have guy friends who are like that, but it does seem like I have like I know more women who are like that than men who are like that.
yeah, and it's, I think it's locational too, because in New York, having cool clothes was absolutely important. Like you had to be dressed a certain way to fit into whatever group you were with, whether that was like the Brooklyn hipster or like the Manhattan kind of like yuppie type of person. But in DC, it
Oh,
matters.
what are the differences between those two?
Oh, okay. So a Brooklyn hipster, actually, you would probably fit in a little bit more with the Brooklyn hipsters, except they have a very, they're usually kind of like arrogant, and they're always like accusing people of being inauthentic. um,
That's funny.
Despite the fact that they're like, the stereotype is that they're like living off of their parents' money, and they're paying for this really expensive apartment that they can't afford, and they're like, they should be a starving artist, but their parents are paying for them, you know. um, and then the Manhattan yuppie is just like a finance guy probably who wears a suit to a bar. I guess, yeah, I mean those are the two main ones, but
Oh,
I see
okay.
a good meme, I'll send it your way.
Oh, okay. No, that's really interesting. Sorry, I interrupted you though. You were going to talk about something similar in Washington.
Oh, I mean, it's very different here. Being cool is less important, I think, or it's different. Being cool is different. Um, like getting ahead in some sort of government program or like in an office is cool, whereas in Brooklyn, it's cool to not care about that.
Yeah, that's interesting, those different cultural attitudes
Yeah.
towards that.
Yeah, and these are all specific to like my age group too, right? Because somebody with 3 kids probably doesn't give a shit about being cool in that way. um,
Yeah.
they care more about like the stuff that they're doing with their kids, I think, or like having their kids in the right play group or at the right school. Like that would be more useful to them.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. I don't know. If you ever come to New York, I'll show you around.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great place. It's fun, but
I do want to visit there at least once. It does sound like a very exciting place to visit for sure.
it's unique. Yeah, I've never been anywhere like it.
My brother loves it when he goes there. Mostly because he likes that faster pace, I think, and also because he's he's a big fan of musical theater and he's an actor
Yeah.
himself and also a stage actor. So he loves to go to lots of plays when he's there. And I think he went with his girlfriend last time, and they also went to a whole bunch of museums when they were there. And I fucking love museums, so that's awesome too.
Yeah, well, DC has better museums because we have the Smithsonian, which is entirely free. So you just walk in and out and like
Oh wow,
do
cool.
whatever. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So that's, I mean, my interpretation. But Neil deGrasse Tyson works in New York, so
That's true. You can go to his museum in New York.
that is true. Yeah.
Do you like the Smithsonian more though?
Yeah, I think they have a lot more stuff, and they're better designed for the most part, I would say. I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're like the Natural History Museum in New York is very cool. But aside from that, like you really have to be into art. Whereas I think the Smithsonian, there's like more for people who are like into history or into like cultural things. Um, yeah, I think there's just more here.
That sounds more appealing to me too. More
Yeah,
more nerdy things.
yeah, exactly. It's a little bit more nerdy. Yeah.
I always use nerdy in a positive way. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, I was also always a nerd, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
in school I was like I would often hang out with the nerds, but I wasn't like one of the smart kids, so I didn't quite fit in with that group because I didn't develop a passion for learning until after school.
yeah, so my parents were like very into to school and learning, and I think they did a good job of telling us that we were smart from a young age and that we were expected to do well and that we can do well. Um, so it never really occurred to me that that was such a huge factor in success as at a young age, but I think it really is. And a lot of parents don't know that that's, I mean, I don't know what your parents were like at all, but like
No,
I
my parents were probably much more like yours by the sounds of it.
yeah, I mean, I had friends though that like their parents kind of pegged them as like the dumb one and didn't really help them out, and therefore they didn't do well. So that happens. Yeah, or like your teachers kind of treat you like
Yeah.
you're one of the dumber kids or whatever.
I just honestly, I probably could have done like I always did my homework. I wasn't one of the slackers or anything like that, but I probably could have done a lot better in school if I just had more interest. Like it's like what I've heard a lot of people say recently, people who I admire who have already mentioned like Thaddeus Russell talk about how just school is just like to me it seemed really boring the whole time because I just didn't have that much of an interest in it. If I could go back now with the same interest in learning that I do now, I bet I would do a lot better. So it's not even this, and this is why this is one of the many things that I've learned in recent years, which is that it wasn't that I was dumb throughout school, and I had this mindset throughout school. It was that I just wasn't interested, basically, because like I'm not like a super genius, but I'm a fairly intelligent person now. Like, and it doesn't make me special either, of course, because like I just love reading lots of books, basically, and I love learning, and that can get anyone a long way, I think, right?
Well, that's like a really common experience, I think, is that school's just boring. And I had lots of classes where I was just bored as shit, but like I did it because I was like afraid of failing or something like that. Um, but I really do think that most people can learn just about anything. Like, are they going to be like an Einstein, probably not, but you can become proficient at just about anything, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. This is why, like in that blog about reading books that I wrote, I said like you can almost if it's a really fucking good nonfiction book that's really well written by someone who has a lot of knowledge in a field, it's almost like getting an introductory course in a particular subject. And if you read like a dozen books just like that on that subject, you can get really knowledgeable. It's not like it makes you a scientist or anything like that necessarily, but you can become phenomenally knowledgeable about a subject just by reading a bunch of books or doing a whole bunch of practice if it's something practical that you want to learn, like to be an electrician or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much that people just kind of stop themselves from even considering. Yeah, maybe math is intimidating, or like reading a long book is intimidating, but if you can break it down into smaller pieces and just like learn a little bit of it at a time, it's really not that scary when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and it's really fun too. Like when you're reading a book, I don't know about you, but even though I'm a huge fan of movies and I probably watch several movies a week, one difference for me with books in comparison to movies is that I feel like I've made an accomplishment once I've read a book.
Yeah, I feel like I did something, whereas a movie, I don't really feel that same the same sense of effort, I guess. But
Yeah,
I do really love movies. Like I just think they're so much fun, and people put a lot of work and effort into them.
of
So
course.
I don't see why we can't appreciate them.
Of
And I
course,
think
it's like we were talking about with fiction versus nonfiction books. Like they both have a lot of value for different and sometimes the same reasons.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Um, which reminds me, tomorrow is the Mudbound chat, so I'm hoping that will be a good chat also.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because I just watched that movie and it does raise a lot of what I would say are typical like mixed mental arts subjects that we discuss a lot, like honor culture and naive realism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Yeah.
So, um, so I might head out in the next couple of minutes. I don't
Okay.
have any hard and fast deadlines, but
No, we've been talking for a while, and yeah, this is a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks a
yeah,
lot.
I had so much fun, and I've
Me
been into
too.
podcasts for like whatever, like kind of a while now. I think like 6 or 7 years. And so like
Me
being
too.
on a podcast is just a dream come true. So,
Awesome. Well, I'm
so
happy to
thank
make your
you for
dreams go
having me.
true. Even though my podcast isn't something like really famous like Mixed Mental Arts or Joe Rogan or something like that,
It's
but hopefully
a
I'll get there eventually.
yeah, no, I hope so too. I've I've been trying to get a couple of friends into like MMA, and so I think that your podcast would be good to kind of get to know some of the people there, because once you know a little bit about people, they're less intimidating, and you feel like you can interact with them. So
Yeah,
um,
for sure.
yeah, so it's good that I can just point them to this. So yeah,
Thanks. I appreciate that. And yeah,
yeah,
hopefully we talk many times more too. I'm sure we have lots more to discuss.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I'll just say all the things I like to say at the end of my videos, and then you can offer any plugs you have if you want to. I already added your Twitter to the description of this video, I think, but
Oh,
if you have
yikes.
anything else you want to plug or anything like that. Uh,
Okay. I don't think I say anything worthwhile on
yeah,
Twitter, but
okay.
sure.
Um, but yeah, so thanks everyone for watching and listening to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Had a great conversation with Alex, and as always, keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the world. I love you all. And also, uh, oh yeah, I almost forgot. Thank you so much for everyone who's subscribed to my channel, and thank you so much to everyone who's become my patron on Patreon, and thank you so fucking much to anyone else who subscribes to my channel or contributes to me on Patreon. It means a lot to me and allows me to do more conversations and other awesome things like this. And also, most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right. So, do you have any other plugs there, Alex?
I really don't. But if you want to talk to me on the MMA group chat, I'm absolutely there.
Yeah, check out the MMA Facebook group if anyone's interested. I'll add the link for that in this description too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much for talking to me again, Alex, and thanks everyone so much for watching. Adios until next time.